time this all is, but this is where we are at now. And I should also mention that we have our chat room that I'm monitoring over here off camera. So I can look into the chat room and see if anybody wants to chat. Now that chat room is live on our Twitch channel. You might be watching it on Facebook. You might be watching on YouTube. You might be watching on the Pro Cannabis Media website. Because if you go onto the Pro Cannabis Media website and you click on Twitch Live, you'll see this. But then again, you've already seen it since, anyway, let's not go there. We've got a few news items I do want to go through today. And one of them in particular is really kind of interesting. I love this one. Cannabis holiday gifts for every type of friend. Cannabis holiday gifts for every type of friend. So I guess now that we're accepting cannabis as part of our world, you can offer holiday gifts to your favorite cannabis consumer. Now, one of my favorite cannabis consumers is someone, well, I'm just going to refer to her in her first name because you'll probably get very upset at me that I'm even mentioning her, but her name is Hannah and it's her birthday today. So we wish Hannah a happy birthday. Now, as far as holiday gifts go, pre-rolls are great gifts, great stocking stuffers, right? You can also get some chocolates, edible chocolates. How about a cannabis cooking book? How about a bong? How about something for the shelf like a glass pipe? There are so many different things that a cannabis consumer would appreciate receiving underneath their tree or next to their menorah if you happen to be of Jewish persuasion. And I'm pretty sure Hanukkah's first night is coming up Friday night. And I'm going to see if I get a confirmation of that in my chat room. And gee, I don't see it yet, but I'm going to go out on a limb. I think I'm right. I'm pretty sure it's December 11th is the first night of Hanukkah. So that's just one of those things I'd throw out there. Did you know that cannabis is now the biggest agricultural commodity in the great state of Maine? That's right. Now, I lived in Maine for 11 years, had a great time in Portland, Maine from 1981 to 1992. You might want to read about that in your history books. But I was up there as a sports guy on the weekends, and I love the state of Maine. I used to spend my summers at Camp Caribou in Winslow, Maine. And then I got to work in Maine for 11 years. It was fantastic. The people of Maine are some of the nicest people you will ever meet. In fact, I still find that the coaches that I interacted with on a regular basis in Portland, Maine during that time, still some of the nicest guys I ever met in sports in that whole career of mine that I had for 25, 30 years. But now let's talk about Maine. Did you know that the state of Maine was known for its wild blueberries? I know I did. Did you know that potatoes were grown in Maine? Of course you did, right? In fact, now, however, cannabis sales have totaled $221 million in Maine from January through October, more than double what had been sold at the same time last year. And 184 million potatoes have been sold. So there is more weed being sold and created in the state of Maine now than potatoes. And that's just amazing, I think, in so many ways. So that's the state of Maine. Another state that has voted in adult use cannabis is New Jersey. That's right. You know, that's where Stockton University is. I just thought I'd throw that. And sure enough, the governor there, Phil Murphy, and his legislators have reached a deal on cannabis legalization. And I think one of the first things that they did was form a cannabis regulation board. Let's see if I'm right. I'm pretty sure. But more importantly now, they have agreed on the first steps on rolling out their adult use recreational weed sales in New Jersey. And let's see what else I got here. I got a few more news items I want to throw out. Florida, another state that is now looking to push adult use recreation sales. Did you know, this is kind of interesting. So Florida only has a medical cannabis program, okay? And did you know, I know there's a number in here. I'm looking for it. I think I saw it, 440,000 medical patients in the state of Florida. I know I probably should have written all this down and had all this prepared, right? But you know, when you do a live show, you wait till the last minute to do everything. And that's exactly what I did. 450,000 patients, medical cannabis patients in the state of Florida. Okay. And the medical marijuana industry in Florida is worth around $1 billion. Now, you add adult use cannabis to that, in a state like Florida, where there's a lot of people, let's just say, well on in age, maybe that's going to be one of the states that actually has a more vibrant medical program than adult use recreational program. I don't know, could be, but they're going to be working on that as well. Did you know that Alaska has a very vibrant cannabis for sale community as well? And Anchorage leads the state in that one. This is probably what I'm most excited. Sure, everybody wants to talk about the MORE Act. The U.S. House of Representatives basically voted for the decriminalization, opening of the bank, expunging records as part of the MORE Act last Friday. That's big news. That was symbolic more than anything else, because we all know that this is not going anywhere in the U.S. Senate. In fact, I don't even think Mitch McConnell wants to deal with it before the end of the year, because he's still in control of the Senate and he doesn't want to lose control of that Senate. And those 2 seats up in Georgia obviously will dictate the control of the Senate. But they are now, the U.S. House of Representatives again, is poised to vote on a bill this week that will accelerate medical cannabis research. And we know a lot of cannabis researchers. Dr. Mary McNabb from Massachusetts is probably one of the most well-known researchers in this space, and here in the Bay State. And they may be voting on this today. It's Wednesday. We call this show Professor Weed Wednesday, so that's how I know it's actually Wednesday. Okay. And this MMJ research bill does have bipartisan support. It's expected to pass the House of Representatives and go nowhere in the Senate. You know, politicians, it's just I just don't get it. If they only represented the people's will, the people want to see legalization of cannabis. The latest Gallup poll, Pew Research, Gallup poll 68%, Pew Research had it at 63% in the fall of 2019. That certainly has gone up as reflected in the Gallup poll. I mean, and of course, what do politicians want? They want what's best for their constituents, right? So if you add a federal tax on top of the state tax, granted, it's going to be a very pricey commodity in stores, but at least you won't go to jail like too many people of color have gone to jail for carrying a few joints. This is what we need to get to. We need to stop arresting people and profiling them for cannabis possession. We need to decriminalize it so we can open the banks for MRBs, marijuana-related businesses, and for those who touch the plant. And I'm talking about the vertical companies that grow it, and then they wholesale it, and then they decarboxylate it and turn it into edibles and concentrates and all that magical stuff that people like. And then they open up their doors and they sell it. I didn't need that pen. So they'll be taking up a medical cannabis research bill. I think all they're trying to do in the House now is drive the Senate crazy, right? Because they're just going to keep passing these bills during the lame duck session and know they're not going anywhere, but at least it gives them something to do every day. Unbelievable. How about this? We're going to give a plug for a cannabis grow firm. They grow cannabis, yes, and this is a firm that grows it. It's called Grow Generation Corp. And they're looking to raise $125 million in a stock offering. It would be a secondary stock offering to fuel their expansions, according to a filing with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. And they also own a chain of hydroponic garden centers. And they're based in Denver. What a shock. And now they've targeted 7 states for expansion: Illinois, Massachusetts, Missouri, New Jersey, New York, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. And they recently acquired the assets of GrowBiz, one of the largest hydroponic garden centers in California and in Oregon. For example, Grow Generation has generated $131 million in revenue in its first 9 months of this year. And they've more than doubled their revenue for the same period in 2019. The company posted a profit for a 9-month period of 3.8 million, compared with earnings of the same period of 2.3 a year ago. And the company already trades on NASDAQ as GRWG. So if people are looking for stock tips, okay, this isn't a stock tip, it's just news, because I can't give stock tips. And by the way, you'd never want to take a stock tip from me. You probably don't want to take any sports insight either from me, but I could give it to you if you wanted it. Anyway, if you want that kind of a thing, if you're looking to make an investment in the cannabis space, obviously the growing side of the business is probably the safest, because the growing side is only going to grow. Very good. Appreciate that. And coming to a retail shelf near you, if you happen to shop at the vitamin shops, Martha Stewart's CBD wellness products. Now, there are a lot of celebrity endorsers of products out there. A lot of sports celebrities have either invested in or actually are endorsing some CBD-based products. But Martha Stewart, I mean, she's in a class by herself, isn't she? I think she is. Speaking of training, anyway, couldn't resist. And the Martha Stewart brand has been developed in collaboration with Canopy Growth Corporation and Marquee Brands, a New York-based global brand owner and marketer. And right now it's available online, but soon to be coming to the vitamin shops near you. So that is the news of the day, the news items that I picked up on over the last few hours. And I can also, again, tease the fact that we have a great show for you. I was just on a panel discussing media in cannabis, and whoa, look at that. The chat room's going nuts. I think I'll actually have time to take a look at it as we take our 4:20 break, just coming up in a minute or two. A reminder, at the bottom of this half hour, we will be talking with a canna mom from Revolutionary Clinics. Her name is Barbara Van Hoosen, and we'll be talking with her as well. Didn't know she actually held a master's degree in psychology. Good industry to get into if you have a background in psychology. And she too has a very compelling cannabis story. It is amazing to me how many of these stories we've heard, that cannabis has saved my life, cannabis has changed my life. And I can give you a little tease, we might actually be involved with a promotion soon where we are going to solicit your cannabis story. Tell us your cannabis story, because that's what Pro Cannabis Media was formed about. We want to be the voice of the cannabis industry, telling the stories of those in the industry and those who have saved their lives or changed their lives through cannabis. Now, we know there's a group of individuals out in California. They called themselves the Waldos in high school in the 1970s, 71 to be exact. These guys, typical 70s high school students, would meet outside the high school at 20 past 4 at the Louis Pasteur statue, and they would partake in this magical herb. They would catch a little buzz until law enforcement figured out that every day at 20 past 4, there's a bunch of high school kids getting high across the street from the school. So law enforcement picked up on the 420 code as code to their fellow officers, public consumption of cannabis going on at the corner of Main Street and Vine Street, 420. Check it out. That's how 420 emerged as the time, date, number that has been embraced by the cannabis culture and cannabis community. And that is why April 20th is celebrated every year as a celebration of the cannabis plant. And it's all thanks to those guys, the Waldos from California. Now, I was not a member of the California Waldos because I grew up in Massachusetts, about 2 miles from where this studio is located in Wellesley, Massachusetts. I grew up in Newton, Massachusetts, pretty much on the Wellesley line in Waubun. Not that you really care, but that's really where I grew up. And sure enough, when I was growing up in the 70s, whenever we heard the song Shanty by Jonathan Edwards, we had that same feeling that, you know what, I think it's time to go out and catch a buzz. If you've never heard the song Shanty, it means you haven't been watching our show, because every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 4:20, we take the break. We give a salute out to Jonathan Edwards, and he.
Yeah, this is a tune that I wrote back in 19... I've forgotten. We had a saying in our old band, one of my first bands in 1966 or so. What are you going to do tonight? Oh, just, like every other night, just going to lay around the shanty and put a good buzz on. Gonna sit down in the kitchen, fix me something good to eat. Make my head a little high, make the whole day complete. Gonna lay around the shanty, oh mama, and put a good buzz on. Pass it to me, baby, pass it to me slow. We'll take time out to smile a little before you let her go. We're gonna lay around the shanty, oh mama, and put a good buzz on. You're on something. Go ahead. Rick Brodsky, everybody. Nothing to do and there's always room for more. Fill it, light it, shut up and close that door, baby. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. Take it, okay. Prohibition never works, it's time to realize it. It grows in my backyard, it's time to legalize it. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. I'm gonna sit down in my rented car. I'm gonna jam it into drive. I'm gonna head on out and play at WSCA with Sean. I'm glad I'm alive. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. Every night and day, we're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on.
Take your Zoom call podcasts or webinars to a whole new level.
Nurse Mark and the Green Nurse Podcast. Woo! We are here.
That's right. PCM can animate your logo, add eye-catching full-screen graphics, and lower third identifying motion graphics. Look like the network. Act like the network.
Media.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Cannabis Chat for a Wednesday afternoon. We call this Professor Weed Wednesdays. I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media, and I'm certainly happy that you are joining us. And I understand that we may have had a little technical snafu, but everything is back to normal, and we will continue with the program right up until 6 p.m. Eastern Time this evening. And we will be welcoming in our first guest in just a matter of minutes, but I want to thank the chat room, okay? Because I learned that indeed the calendars that say first night of Hanukkah, December 11th, are wrong, because I've been told in the chat room, anyway, you know who you are, and you chatted and told me that it's December 10th to the 18th. So Thursday night, December 10th, is the first night of Hanukkah. So there you go. One more completely little piece of tidbit knowledge that you probably don't care about. I think people have heard me talk a little bit in the past about Jonathan Edwards' song Shanty. We play it every Monday, Wednesday, Friday here at 20 past 4. And it was played at a radio studio in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. That's where you see Jonathan Edwards performing. It's radio station WSCA. Now, in my lifetime, growing up in the 70s in the greater Boston area, there used to be a radio station, a daytimer that we used to listen to. It was alternative rock because you had BCN 104.1 on the FM dial. What's that? Oh, okay. So now this is going to be interesting, right? So I have to walk across the studio now, and I have to admit our guest and also make Dan French the host of this. And then I'll get back to my story about WCAS. It has absolutely nothing to do with cannabis, really, other than the letter C. But hang on one sec. Don't go away. Watch. I'm gonna creep in. I'm gonna creep over here. I'm gonna kind of be okay. I'm still here, and I'm going to make Dan the host. Make the host. Yes. And now you can admit Barbara to the room. Did you miss me? Really? Okay, WCAS, the daytimer, 7:40 a.m. It came out of Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I wonder if Barb remembers that station. I don't know. We'll run that by her. But sure enough, they have the same call letters, just different order. Who knew? Right? I just figured that one out. And there is Barb. Hi, Barb.
Hi, how are you?
Good. And, I think we've met over the years that I've been involved with Rev Clinics in some capacity.
Yes,
am I right?
That is right.
And we don't have to go through the do you know, how you doing, all that. Thank you so much for joining us. I so appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
And I got to start. You are known, you've been labeled as the Canna Mom, correct, at Revolutionary Clinics?
Yes, I have.
So, and I know you know the other Canna Mom,
Joyce
Gerber, right?
Yes.
So when the Canna Mom, you went on the Canna Mom show with
That's
Joyce,
right.
Was that a little confusing? There was a lot of Canna Moms in the room.
It was really fun. I enjoyed it so much.
And I was arguing with a mutual friend who, let's just say his initials are TS, and who was first. That's why I like that. Which Canna Mom emerged first with the nickname? And not that I don't care. I'm just happy that there are two of you. Anyway, Barb Van Hoosen, tell me a little bit about your own personal cannabis story, because I'm familiar with it, but I always like to share this immediately whenever I talk to people, because it does seem that everybody has a cannabis story, whether it changed your life or saved your life at some point. Tell us your story, Barb.
Absolutely. So I have a chronic back condition. I have degenerative disc disease, and I have arthritis in between my, discs in my spine, and I have the narrowing of the spine. So I have a really amazing spine that causes me a lot of pain. And I've had back surgery. I've been dealing with chronic pain because of my back for over a decade. About 4 years ago, I thought, my husband actually brought it up, why not look into cannabis? Because I was so miserable on opiates for pain relief. and I was really not functioning. I was a zombie. So I actually looked into becoming a cannabis patient, and it literally changed my life. I could use combinations of CBD and THC, stay nice and clear-headed and focused, but be free of pain and be functional. So it really has been a huge benefit in my life. I don't use opiates anymore for pain, and I'm able to get kind of ahead of a flare up if I do have pain that's acting up. And so it's really been great for me.
And as someone, I share the chronic pain thing. I share the arthritis thing. I share the back surgery thing. So, I could totally relate to that. One of the things that I talk to my peers about dealing with chronic pain and using cannabis to help you with that is we use the word maintenance, because whatever you could use to maintain your pain-free existence in order to actually have a normal lifestyle is the goal, right?
That's right. That's absolutely right. I just want to be able to get up every day, be a functional employee, a good partner to my spouse, a great mother to my child, and, an overall functional contributing member of society. And so I want to be able to, make sure that I'm on a regimen that keeps me pain-free, or at least, with chronic pain, I don't know that I'm ever free of pain, but manageable.
That's right. And my pain, I have really ugly fingers. I have really hard osteoarthritis in my hands. And just this morning, I banged everybody knows that you have a lot of nerve endings on the end of your fingers, right? They're very sensitive, right? If anybody's ever had a cut or paper cut or anything like that. Well, when the knuckles are exposed, which is really what you got, and you bang it against a hard surface like a closet door, I mean, it goes beyond the 10, the 1 to 10 pain threshold. It hurts so bad, but I move on because that's what we have to do. Tell me your role at Revolutionary Clinics. What exactly is your official title besides Canamom, of course?
My official title is the Senior Wellness Consultant at Revolutionary Clinics. So what I do is really try to help patients who are either new to cannabis, and they just don't understand about different methods of consumption, and they have questions about that. I try to help them understand what the options are. Also, if they are, they don't have to be new to cannabis. If they have questions about new products on our menu, or if they are trying to, look for other ways of medicating that they haven't tried before and they need a little bit of guidance, some questions answered, I do consultations with people. I was able to really build up our virtual consultation program during the pandemic. Since we don't have patients in our store to ask questions, we can do a virtual consultation online.
And that's been, it's interesting as we look back at this history, hopefully 6 months, a year, they're rolling the vaccine out now, the adaptability of our economy and how we really still have been able to maintain certain elements, certainly the restaurant industry, the sports industry. I mean, any place where there is mass entertainment has taken the biggest hit for sure. But there are still other industries that have adapted. And what's going to happen next? Are we going to keep being remote? Like I'm sitting in an empty room in my studio talking to myself and someone on the Zoom call, Barb, obviously. But I wonder what's going to happen to office space. And I like going into dispensaries and hanging out and checking out some of the educational materials that both you guys have and most other dispensary have as well. Not to mention chatting with the bud tender. And I don't like that word. I like patient advocate for sure, because it's all about self-medication. When you're talking to the senior centers, if you will, or those that are much older than me, okay, and you're enlightening them about cannabis, what's the one, do you have to explain that you have to self-medicate? Because I think a lot of people, when we grow up in Western medicine and we go to our doctors and we trust our doctors to write us a prescription, we're going to do what they ask us to do. And we go to the pharmacy, we fill it, we take our pills, and that's how we've medicated. Now, you don't have to do that with plant medicine, do you?
That's right. Yeah, I do think that for some folks, they're expecting a prescription and not just sort of the certification or license to go in and make choices about what they would like to use. So that can be kind of a culture shock for some patients. I think it's really refreshing for a lot of patients, though, to know that they have a choice in what they want to try, what they want to do. When I start a consultation, I always ask, first of all, why are you using cannabis? What's your goal, right?
Wait a second. It says right here, how can I assist you today? That's your
That's
first
right.
question.
Yeah, so that's
I
when
think
they would come in. How can I assist you? You were doing your research on the Rev website.
a little bit. Yeah, I did.
um, but really the second question is, what are your boundaries? Is there anything that you want to avoid? Some folks don't want to smoke, they don't want to vape, some do not want to consume edibles. So I try to feel out where, what they're open to and what they'd prefer to stay away from. And then know that they have the freedom to, make those choices outside of the boundaries. I can help narrow you in and give you some ideas of what might assist you with that goal that you have.
Yeah, I think that's great. And obviously, you're giving back and you're helping people out. It's a wonderful career job to get involved with, because you have that immediate impact on people. Because I'm going to guess the second or third time you return to that center and people are starting to use it, they come up to you with incredible relief. Yes?
Oh, yes. It's really the best part of the job is hearing back from patients who've been, very pleased with the results. I had a patient who really suffered from extreme insomnia, hadn't slept a full night in really as long as she could remember. She couldn't even tell me the last time she slept a full night. And, we did some trial and error. She tried out a couple of things. When she found that perfect product for her and she was able to sleep all night long, she said it literally changed her life. And she was so relieved and grateful that this was an option out there that she had never had any idea that she could get such a nice result from. So I love hearing those stories. Of course, every now and then you have a patient who does struggle with finding the right product or dose. So I do try to make sure patients know from the beginning there is trial and error involved. It's not a set prescription from one person to the other, but that I'm always a resource and will always help try to figure that out with you if you need help.
And we all know the mantra of starting low and going slow, right?
Yes.
It's what you got to do. And you do have to self-medicate. And the other thing about this plant and the different products that you outlined, whether it's tincture or edibles or even suppositories now, there's definitely a cult of suppository users out there as well as smoking and vaping. And even, it's interesting, whenever I have educators on, or doctors or nurses, when they talk about titration, when they talk about actually consuming, nobody recommends or even talks about dabbing. And you and I both know that there is a culture of dabbers out there, right?
Yes, that's right. I think, a lot of folks will ask me about concentrates and what are these things on your menu? And I explain to them, that for most people, concentrates are used for dabbing, explain what that is. And almost universally, the response is, oh, okay, that's maybe not step 1 or 2. And I say, exactly. That's really not a starting point, but it is a point you can, investigate and look into as you feel more comfortable with cannabis. But certainly it's not a place I recommend folks starting.
No, and the butane torch alone kind of threw me off a little bit. I just want to say, where they have to heat it up and all that. And doctors don't like the combusting.
Right.
That's why they don't, if you don't want to smoke it, they may say, okay, vape the flower. We know Dr. Jordan Tischler. I get Jordan Tischler and Jordan Kobritz mixed up all the time, and nobody knows who Jordan Kobritz is except Jordan Kobritz and Steve Buckley, who's a former writer for the Herald and now writes for a national publication. But Jordan, we all know who Dr. Jordan Tischler is, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And he's the one who says vaping flower is okay, including a guy we interviewed on Monday on our Medicinal Monday show, and that was Dr. Eric Ruby. Are you familiar with Dr. Eric Ruby?
I'm not.
Well, I'm going to guarantee you, recommend that if you watch that last half hour of Monday's show with Dr. Eric Ruby, you're going to be blown away, really.
Nice.
This guy is a pediatric cannabis referral person. And he retired after 43 years recently, which obviously freaked out a lot of parents, because you got to figure, if you've got a sick kid And Barb, have you ever had a parent come to you with a sick kid and they've tried all these different seizure medications that are out there and what have you, or they might have autism?
Yes, I have.
How do you handle that? Because you and I both know you're not supposed to even be able to refer cannabis to a kid.
Right. So there are certainly some exceptions and depends on, case by case. We've had parents come into the dispensary that are caregivers for children of different ages.
Right.
And, sometimes they sort of disclose to you what's happening, what they're medicating for. Other times they're very quiet about it, which, there is obviously a stigma about using cannabis as adults, let alone giving your child cannabis. So I can understand when people, really are closed off to having that conversation. I did speak to someone during the early months of the pandemic who was not a patient, but whose child was very ill, and he was really reaching for anything that could help comfort his child. It was a terminal illness.
Yeah.
And, I sort of walked him through how all of this works. And if you're a patient, the medication is for you. But, I'll be honest with you. I broke down after I had that conversation because I could feel the anguish and the desperation in that parent's voice. And we all want to do the best for our children, let them be healthy, happy, comfortable. And certainly in a situation like that, it is very upsetting if I can't offer that person something immediately, right? They weren't a patient. The child wasn't a patient. So it was just a matter of, can they get a doctor on board to assist?
And since 2000, Dr. Ark Ruby has been pro cannabis and helping because his own child, who had a horrific car accident and was paralyzed, was on opioids. Like every Western medicine doctor immediately gives you opioids for your pain, right? That's been the knee-jerk prescription, if you will. That has changed quite a bit over the last few years as knowledge of the dangers of being addicted to those have also changed, and we've done some research on it. And of course, now that alternative to getting off opioids is cannabis, and we've probably know dozens, if not hundreds, of people who have beaten their opioid habit, or at least substituted it using cannabis. Am I right?
Absolutely. Cannabis is an exit drug. It's not a gateway drug. There are so many patients who've disclosed that they no longer they're recovering alcoholics, or they're recovering from an addiction to pills of some sort, often opiates. And cannabis helps them get rid of those, the triggers and the response. They're able to use cannabis, be functional, and stay away from the drug that made them completely non-functional. And so, cannabis it's an exit drug. I always want us to be very mindful when we're marketing products to remember that some of our patients are dealing with former alcoholism or recovering. And same with drug addiction, maybe opiates. So I always want to make sure our language is careful and that we're not triggering someone, for example, who is using cannabis to stay away from those addictions.
Right. And the other evolution of this is the interaction between those prescribed medications and the cannabis plant. And that's a new realm of research that is going on, is what is the effect of your regular statin that you take or something like that, or an antidepressant you might be on. What effect does the plant have on that? I'm sure when you talk to especially seniors, they have to share that with you too.
Yes. And when folks do ask me specifically about a medication interaction, I always remind them that the cannabis clinician who certified them as a patient in the program is the best resource for specific medical questions. I'm not a doctor, so I don't want to give medical advice. I just try to help people understand, what their options are with cannabis. But I always remind people that just because you were certified one day and paid money to be certified in the program, it doesn't mean that you can't lean on that cannabis clinician to help you out with specific questions like drug interactions. It's a great question. The good news is, it's not something that most patients have to worry about. It really does depend on the medication, though. So I always suggest that folks do reach out to their clinician just for those kind of specific questions.
And there's also this trend going on, not necessarily in a medical dispensary, and I know that's Rev Clinic's only dispensaries, but when they go to adult use recreational facilities, a lot of times people who are buying it in line will say, well, I use it medicinally. And then, of course, the follow-up question is, well, if you use it medicinally, have you ever thought about getting a medical card? And for some reason, a lot of people are like, no, I don't want a medical card, but I do use it to help me sleep or get over my anxiety or my depression. And I'm like, yeah, those are 3 things that you could get your medical card for. Oh, and by the way, you're going to save 20% off the taxes if you get your medical card. So there are some advantages, and it's really not difficult now with so many opportunities to get certified, including over telehealth now.
Telehealth, I think, has been such a huge door opening for folks because they don't have to leave their homes. They can speak to a doctor or a nurse practitioner online. Some will do it just right over the phone. And so I think it's really been a game changer for folks during the pandemic. And I really love the accessibility that brings to people because, one of the things we forget is that access to a doctor's office, access to a dispensary can be really tricky for some folks who do have mobility concerns,
right,
or folks who are severely immunocompromised, especially right now during the pandemic. So having the option for telehealth, having the option for home delivery as a medical patient, is fantastic. And like you said, the money savings on tax alone, not to mention the fact that every medical dispensary will give you some sort of savings. I think Rev has the best savings, our $200 off a $400 new patient discount. But certainly you can take advantage of multiple dispensaries having those kinds of medical savings for patients.
Absolutely. One of the things you've mentioned, you called cannabis an exit drug. Okay. And you also mentioned the stigma. And one of the things I'm working on a lot is not calling this plant a drug anymore. I do think at some point in the next 6 months to a year, we'll actually see it get descheduled, rescheduled. It won't be, aligned with some of those drugs that are evil and difficult and shouldn't and have no medicinal value, like ecstasy and your heroin and your LSD. But rescheduling cannabis away from those, and I'm not sure where you want to put it. We could certainly debate that too. But my point is, it's plant medicine, just like there's plant diets now, right? All the vegans in the world. And I've seen documentaries on the superiority of a vegan diet against perhaps my diet. So I guess my where I'm going with this is, do you see a time when we won't be referring to cannabis or marijuana as a drug and calling it what it is, and it's a plant?
I mean, I really do hope so. I feel very strongly in, stating over and over again, like my motto is cannabis is medicine. Everyone should have access to cannabis as medicine if they want it. It really does break my heart when, I'll receive emails and texts, Facebook messages because people, kind of find out, oh, I have a friend who works in cannabis. And so they have a friend who's in a different state with questions. And to find out that they're in a state where cannabis is not available recreationally or medically, but they have a real medical need, it really does break my heart that they don't have access to these things.
Right. And, I mentioned Dr. Eric Ruby, the interview we did with him. And one of the things he told us is that last Saturday, that he was on a teleconference with a few hundred of his brethren for the Mass Medical Society. And one of the things that he was so proud of is that medical society is going to rid its policies with the word marijuana and replace it with cannabis. And that is a huge step in many, many avenues here. But when you get acceptance from a medical society to understand that, it's not that term anymore, it's truly a plant and it's plant medicine. I think that's a pretty big step. He was very excited about it.
Yeah, it is huge. And I try very hard to use the word cannabis in my language as well. Although we do have the medical marijuana program in Massachusetts, it is nice to see that there is a movement more and more to referring to the plant as cannabis, to referring to the plant as medicine, and like you said, not a drug. And I think that when I became a patient several years ago, I was very quiet about it. I didn't tell anyone because I had a young child. I'm a mom. Mothers get judged so harshly, parents in general, but moms in particular feel that judgment and weight if we're not perfect. And so I didn't want anybody to know I was using cannabis. And then because it was so positive on my life, my friends all knew how much I suffered with my back pain. They
Right.
knew I was going to the ER twice a year, ending up with epidural pain shots
I
in
was
my
going to say,
spine.
have you had the shots? I've had the shots.
Absolutely. And,
It's not
they've
pleasant.
seen,
It's not a
absolutely,
pleasant.
it is not. They've seen me suffer. They've seen me, unable to function. So when it made such a positive impact on my life, I started letting everyone know. And then I really did embrace the Canna Mom nickname because I thought, you know what, I can be a cannabis patient and a mom, and I am actually better at being a mom with cannabis as my medication because it does allow me to function and to keep going rather than being, completely zonked out and like a zombie.
Right.
So, I work really hard to combat the stigma. But I do know that I absolutely am judged by some people because I'm open about the fact that I believe in cannabis as medicine.
Yeah,
And that's okay.
absolutely, 100% on that. And I just wonder when we might move away from that and rid the stigma once and for all. And the U.S. House of Representatives, voted on the MORE Act last week, which was really a symbolic gesture more than a legislative gesture, but it definitely helps with the acceptance and the understanding that so many people recognize the powers of this plant and really its benign nature. And I'm not saying that you can't have an uncomfortable experience with cannabis, because you absolutely can, but it's controlling that and understanding how to use it. And it's all about education, which is why we devote more than 2 hours a week, by the way, to educating the public about the plant and some of the benefits of the plant, and getting people like yourself and your comrade there, Andrew Elkon, who's one of our favorite guests, by the way.
He's amazing. He really is one of the most knowledgeable people, and he's just, such a great resource. He absorbs things like a sponge, and he knows how to, he's very much an articulate, warm person to speak to. So yeah, he's the best.
One thing I've also noticed, as I do a million interviews a week, it seems now, is the role that the female has played in the cannabis space. And I'm talking about entrepreneurs, not just entrepreneurs, registered nurse. We both know the Green Nurse Group and Sherry Tutkus. The female, and you are a mother, we all seem to have more compassion. And again, I know there are men out there that have plenty of compassion. I know there are plenty of men out there that have plenty of empathy, but it's the mom who's responsible for bringing this child into the world. And that is something that men can't argue with.
That's right.
And I think in a lot of ways, this is another reason why God made the cannabis plant a female that flourishes and flowers. I mean, there's something to be said for that. And I think that you see a lot of women in the cannabis space, right?
Absolutely. I'd love to see more and more women, more people of color, because, we really need to, I don't want to get super focused on this issue, but, we really have benefited as folks who are, Caucasian. We benefit from having cannabis recreationally available. If we are investors, if we're owners, if we work in this dispensaries, and it's, we really have to work on expungement of criminal records because of cannabis. We really need to make sure that people of color are in the dispensaries, are not just, base level, but are at upper levels as well. And to make sure that we are doing as much as we can with the communities to show that we're not being sort of an elite, group of folks who are like, the suburban, white moms who are enjoying their cannabis and don't have to worry about the fallout of potential arrest or something like that. So I do think that we're making huge strides, but we obviously have lots of ways that we can keep improving.
Right. Absolutely. As we wrap this up, I want to ask you this question. And I think you'll be familiar with the question, where it came from, actually. What's something you've learned that you didn't know about the cannabis plant? And I know there's so many things, and Beth Waterfall from Elevate Northeast always talks about there are no experts in cannabis because we're just starting to learn about the powers of the plant. Is there one thing in particular that surprised you when you learned about it?
I think that the most surprising thing, it's hard for me to think back to when I was sort of, a newbie. But I think the most surprising thing to me, and probably to most of the patients that I speak to, is that you can still be clear-headed and focused and, feel the effects of your cannabis medication, and that you don't have to be high, right, in order to feel pain relief. And so the fact that, you can, so I'm very sensitive to THC. So if I'm going to medicate during the day, then I have to be very mindful that I'm not behind the wheel of a car, that I don't have a big, task that's due in a timeline. Most of the time I medicate in the evening, but if I need pain relief during the day, I've gotten really good at knowing how to mix CBD with THC to give me the anti-inflammatory properties I want and the pain relieving properties I want without being high, where I feel like I'm, distracted or giggly or whatever. So I think that was probably the most surprising thing, and something that patients bring up a lot, is that they just didn't realize that you don't have to feel high to get good relief.
Right. And by the way, we can get into the descriptions of the differences between being high, being stoned, and being wasted.
Right.
And overdoing it too, as I learned on Thanksgiving when I had the first illegal product of cannabis that I ingested in the 7 years, 2013, 2020, 7 years that I've had my medical card. And what did I use to control the overwhelming high that I had? Straight CBD.
Yeah.
And it really, really dampened the effect. And that's one of the things that people have to understand. Those are the two most active cannabinoids, right? The THC and the CBD. And while they need each other, they are very much attached to each other as far as the effect it's going to have on you.
Yeah,
and
absolutely. And I personally love incorporating CBD into my medication regimen, because it works so well for hitting all of the things I need it to hit. It's not for everybody, but certainly for me, it's been a game changer. But absolutely, I love it. I think it's a great product. Probably the second, not necessarily surprising thing, but I do have to talk to patients about the differences between CBD that you can buy online or anywhere, health food store, et cetera, versus CBD that's at dispensary level, so that they just understand, regulations and testing, and that there's really no one out there, no agency that's checking on the CBD sold outside of dispensary level. So just being a good, mindful consumer.
That's right. And that's why we point everybody to flowerandtonic.com, because Alyssa Merrill reviews all her CBD products. She tests all her CBD products.
Yes.
And that's a great resource for anybody who just wants to learn a little bit more about the product. Barb Van Hoosen, you are the Canamom. And I so appreciate you joining us here on a last minute fill-in, which I really do appreciate. And we look forward to having you on, and Andrew on, and the whole Revolutionary Clinics family whenever. You are always welcome on this show. So thank you again.
Appreciate it so much. Thank you, Jimmy. Have a good night.
Thank you. And of course, don't go away, folks, because we've got another special guest coming up after this break. Don't go away. Hi, I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media. And as a sportscaster on TV and radio for 25 years, people always thought I was an expert on sports. They used to come up to me at bars and go, "Hey, sports guy, are the Bruins going to win the Stanley Cup or what?" I didn't know then, and I don't know now. Just because I reported on sports and talked intelligently about my love for sports, I was not an expert. I was a talk show host, an anchor, a reporter. Sure enough, the same is true in the cannabis industry. Now, even though it's been around for thousands of years, research is just beginning. The difference, of course, is that there are no real experts in the cannabis space. However, we all believe that we're experts in our own field. For instance, we at Pro Cannabis Media have 75 years of combined experience in commercial media, buying, production, and strategic market planning. Now, we want to help you control your message. After all, you're probably considered an expert in your field, whether that's lighting or containers, law, interior design, or even security systems. We already have an expert in the insurance business for MRBs, that's marijuana-related businesses. Bill Perrier from Charles River Insurance is our expert. He's a member of our PCM Gold Club of experts, and he explains that one of the largest insurers in the world is now writing insurance for cannabis farmers.
Lloyd's of London, 325 years old, the standard bearer in the market, is with a company called Chesterfield Brokers that have launched this parametric insurance for crops.
Insurance is all about timing, and it's a shame we couldn't have got these programs up for the farmers and the other cannabis growers who've been really affected by those West Coast fires.
We also have an accountant for the cannabis space. He's a CPA, Rick Leneve of Accounting Buds, and we rely on both of them for their expertise, and we showcase their expertise in our news and talk shows. In fact, we'll put them inside our original content, and we can talk to them. It's kind of like product placement. So show off your knowledge inside our content as we position your expertise in your field. And you do that by joining our Cannabis Gold Club of experts. That's where you get a chance to show our audience your expertise in your field. This group of entrepreneurs will serve as a referral network in order to generate leads for your business and, of course, build your expertise because it'll be shared during our weekly news and talk shows. So if you want to take advantage of our following and the original content we produce on a weekly basis, contact me, Jimmy Young, or our sales team today. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Take your Zoom call podcasts or webinars to a whole new level.
Nurse Mark and the
Hey.
Green Nurse Podcast. We are here.
That's right. PCM can animate your logo, add eye-catching full-screen graphics, and lower third identifying motion graphics. Look like the network. Act like the networked.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
All right, welcome back to Cannabis Chat on a Wednesday afternoon. We call it Professor Weed Wednesdays, and this is the day that we talk with educators in the cannabis space. We just heard from Barb Van Hoosen, who is involved with the Revolutionary Clinics educational program for seniors, and now I am joined by a friend, comrade, and someone from the Stockton University faculty. His name is Rob Mejia. Rob, thank you again for joining us on Cannabis Chat.
Always pleased to be here, and especially appropriate that it is Professor Weed Wednesday because I am a professor of cannabis, so it's perfect.
That's right. And pretty soon we could make you Professor Weed. But that was, actually that expression started with our first ever conversation that we had and available. That's how it all started. So appreciate it. Hey, what people don't know is that you were the moderator of a media panel today. Can you give me a little background on how that event evolved and how you got involved with it, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the media panel itself.
Sure. So the whole event came about because Stockton University offers a minor in cannabis studies. And what we were doing is we were meeting once a year and having a career fair / educational event. So when we were able to meet in person, of course, we had the big meeting rooms, we had breakout rooms, we networked, we did all that. But not to be pushed aside this year, we decided we were going to go ahead and do it virtually. And so we teamed up with the New Jersey Cannabis Business Association, and we set up a series of panels. We set up breakout rooms. We have booths so students can go and see if they can find some internships or possible jobs. And so this year, instead of just having our in-person career fair, we did it virtually, and I was tapped to do the panel on media. And of course, when I think of media, one person I think of right away is Jimmy Young and Pro Cannabis Media. So I put him on the panel. And then we also had Faye Coleman, who's the CEO of Pure Genesis. We also had Jessie Gill, who is a nurse and also known as Marijuana Mommy. And then we had Mary Jane Oatman, who is a member of the Nez Perce tribe, who gave us kind of the Native American perspective, which I was especially kind of proud to get because you don't really hear a lot about Native Americans and cannabis or hemp. So I thought that would be a good voice to bring in too. And the stew of people that we put together turned out to be absolutely perfect. There was some good back and forth, and I think we all learned a lot. We definitely had a couple laughs because of Jimmy, and it was all good.
It was a lot of fun. And I love that. And I love the social media component of this because, as you know, over the last 48 hours, my own brain is on overdrive on social media and how best to take advantage of it. And it's one of the things we do talk about here as a company. And I shared this with the group today and the panel on how important it is now to control your own message if you're in the cannabis space. And by that, I mean, you can create your own podcast. You can create your own blogs. You can create your own content so that you can control your message and push it out to the social media world and not be dependent on traditional media where you have to buy or get noticed or hire a PR person. To me, having your own channel or your own podcast is a great way to do that. Did that come across in the panel?
It absolutely did. I do think one of the things, though, that's very difficult is the amount of work it takes to do something like that. I mean, you can choose to do a podcast, and that can take up a huge amount of your time. I certainly know from writing that blogs can take up your time. I can't even imagine launching a channel, doing a blog, doing your writing. I mean, the stuff that you're doing, Jimmy, is pretty phenomenal. I think most people pick a couple areas and kind of go in there really deep, whereas you picked kind of a really broad swath, but it seems to be working for you. So keep going. But I love the part, the back and forth on social media and how to target your audience, what works most effectively, what happens on Facebook and Instagram. I mean, that part of the conversation was especially lively, I think.
And timely, because I don't think there are experts on this. I think that everybody thinks they understand SEO, search engine optimization. I think a lot of people think that because they understand the algorithms. Well, the algorithms change like regularly on the internet when it comes to search. So I'm not quite sure there really are real experts in social media. It's how you use social media that I think you can become expert in. Is that an accurate statement, you think?
And I think how you target your social media too, because I know that one of the points that Faye made was that her business deals a lot with CBD and wellness and more on the medical side. And so for her, the population 65 and above was more important. And of course, when you go to social media, where are people who are 65 and above? That's going to be a little different than people who might be spending a lot of time on Instagram, for example, or who might be watching flashy videos or kind of the funny stoner stuff that's out there. So you have to pick your demographic too. So I thought that was a very good point as well.
Right. And again, we talked about, you mentioned targets. Well, what is the cannabis target? The consumer. We just had a woman on from a medical dispensary whose job it is to bring education into senior living. And I don't want to say nursing homes, but assisted living and fully assisted living. And what's the one in between that? Independent living, right? So there are all these opportunities to bring an educational component to that plus 65 group. And yet anybody in the cannabis space knows you have to be on Instagram, because Instagram has more cannabis influencers and users on it than any of the social media platforms. At least that's what I've heard.
Yeah, and Instagram lives more on photos too. I mean, if you have to have good images on Instagram, or you're not really going to get much mileage. Much more dependent than obviously Twitter and LinkedIn, which don't depend as much, but certainly Instagram, very visual.
Very visual. And of course, the power of video, we started talking about television. And as you know, I have this saying I use, if it looks like TV, produced like TV, it's TV, whether it makes over the air TV or not, or cable TV, or internet TV, or OTT. I mean, there's so many different ways to share content now. It boggles the mind. And even to, not necessarily today, but even in our chat room, and I kind of monitor the chat room off camera here, but we're hearing from all over the world, Australia, Italy, I know I'm missing a few, Africa, take your pick a continent. We're hearing about it in chat. And what we're doing, and I know this for a fact, Rob, I guarantee you that nobody's doing 6 hours of live talk about cannabis on the internet like I am every week. No one's ever going to outwork me. I'm going to tell you that right now.
I can tell that you definitely have played sports, and I like that attitude about the hard work. It definitely pays off in cannabis, as it does with everything. But I'm with you. I mean, if you show up and you put your content out there and you start reaching the right people, you will build your audience, and it will be successful.
Well, we'll hope. We just don't know how quickly that's going to be. Let's just say. I do want to get your reaction as an educator to the symbolic vote by the U.S. House of Representatives on Friday and the MORE Act. And it's funny. I'm also going to take a step back because I want you to think about what you're going to say about the MORE Act. But also, did you notice any national media? I'm talking CNN, CNBC, NBC, CBS, ABC. I'll throw Fox in there too, just because. Did they cover the passing of the MORE Act in the House of U.S. Representatives or not? I didn't see a lot of national coverage on it. Did you?
I didn't either. In print media, you did see at least a little paragraph that said, the New York Times. Yes, that's exactly what it was. A little thing that said they'll bet on the MORE Act today, and they'll outline a few provisions, but that's it. They didn't really talk about how it was historic that it's one of the first bills that the House has been voted on that talked about cannabis in over 40 years. And they had debate. I mean, people got up and they actually got to voice their opinions about it. There were some naive questions, naive remarks. There were some pretty savvy remarks as well. I mean, it was really all over the map. So as an educator, I love that at least on a national level that we're talking about it. It certainly is coming. I mean, we keep seeing state after state either legalize medical and or adult use. And we know as a population that on the medical side, approval for medical cannabis is over 90% at the moment. I mean,
Right.
If you ask someone the question, do you think a doctor should be able to recommend cannabis to a medical patient? You'll get 90% of the people that will say, yeah, yes, I think that's a good idea. So we know it's there. Our legislators are catching up. So I did like the symbolic act of it. I like that we're talking about it. I also fully well know that with the Senate still being handled with people who are anti-cannabis, that we're not going to get a vote on that. So I'm very disappointed about it. So I know I should have been more excited about it, but in the back of my head, I'm like, oh yes, this is going to pass, and then it's going to get stopped at the Senate, as have so many other bits of legislation this year.
Right. Which is why all eyes are on Georgia and that runoff election. It's pretty amazing what's going on in the state of Georgia. I don't know how much you follow this, but there's really been a lot of activity in that state, one way and another, to perhaps oust the Republicans and get the Democrats in, or there may be a split. Who knows? Needless to say, at some point, somebody has to be able to reach across the aisle and govern and lead our legislature through this journey that is democracy. Because I've been very frustrated with the government over the last few years. I'm just going to leave it at that. People know how I feel about who, so I'm not even going to mention his name. But there has been a lot of frustration about the lack of governance and the fact that we can't, as people and a country, can't agree on a COVID relief package yet. And I know they're still talking about perhaps moving back to what the Democrats originally put out there, or even Yertle himself. I call Mitch McConnell Yertle because he looks like a turtle.
He does.
Sorry, has admitted maybe we need to at least pass on the things we do agree on before we debate those that have been. And by the way, that was probably one of the most exceptional things I think the guy's ever said, is that that's a good idea. Are we going to see some governance is really where I guess I'm going with this, Rob?
I don't know that I'm feeling especially confident about that. I do think that once we have the Biden and Harris administration, there'll be more discussion about it. I think that leaving the states to run their own business by and large, as far as cannabis goes, will really move the needle pretty quickly. So I think you will see I think we'll see more by legislation rather than by popular vote in the short term. But I think the wave has started, and it's just going to keep going, and it'll go state by state. And any state that did adult use, just look around that area, any bordering state, those are the ones that are going to go next. It just kind of keeps spreading and spreading and spreading.
So, Mr. New Jersey native, please tell me what's going on in your state, because I know that first there was a little bump after the ballot question passed, and then it went to the legislature to actually write the laws and the regulations, and there was definitely an outcry by the social equity community that once again they felt like they weren't being heard. And now they have agreed on legislation that has been accepted, yes?
It has, and the vote is supposed to go down on December 17th. There's two bits of legislation. So the first one is on decriminalization, and that actually should have been passed a long time ago.
Right.
But what happened was there were some debates on the limits. So when the first decrim came out, one of the Maine senators suggested that people be able to that it be decriminalized up to 5 pounds, and also expungement up to 5 pounds, which gets into distribution issues, and also is kind of hard for some legislators to swallow. So anyway, so that was winnowed down to 6 ounces, which still compared to other states is actually quite a lot.
Quite a lot. Oh, yes.
But it's personal possession. So you can actually have 6 ounces as personal possession. But if you have over 1 ounce and it looks like you're going to distribute, then you're in trouble. If you're 1 ounce or under and you're going to distribute, you still get the decrim. You'll get a warning, you'll get a fine, and then you'll get a second fine. So anyway, it looks like decrim will go through. We'll have 6 ounces that will be okay for personal possession, 1 ounce essentially for distribution. And the other thing that happened was at the end, right before they were going to vote, one of the senators tacked on mushrooms or psilocybin, magic mushrooms, to be reduced from a 3 to 5 year penalty down to a 6-month penalty. Not entirely decriminalized, but definitely brought down on the scale. That threw some people off, and so that's why that vote stopped at that point. They had to strip it out. So we're going to have a separate mushroom psilocybin decriminalization bill. So that's what's happening on that side. Then on the
I remember I always ask, and especially, I've been kind of late to the game on the cannabis advocacy world, perhaps over the last 2 years since I've had my podcast, but there have been so many other people from like the Marijuana Policy Project, Normal, the lobbyists in Washington, D.C., people like Steve D'Angelo, Chris Conrad from California, who I just recently was introduced to. And I always ask them this question, for years, one of the arguments about cannabis is it's a gateway drug. That's been refuted. Okay. In fact, if anything, now most people understand that it's actually a great exit drug, if it's a drug at all, to help people off opioids, which is definitely a drug.
And also alcohol. Alcohol.
Right. And alcohol, 100%. In fact, Barb just mentioned that in the last half hour. But to me, don't muddy the water with another plant or a fungus, because that's what mushroom is a fungus, right? But it is grown. I get it. It's another plant medicine. It should not be part of any laws that have to do with cannabis, or at least that's how I feel. How do you feel about that?
I think it certainly makes it cleaner, and especially trying to focus on moving the cannabis business forward. I do think that's probably the best way to go, is to keep them separate. I certainly understand why they're related, and I do think that there are definitely some big health benefits to magic mushrooms, especially for end-of-life care in particular.
Right.
But yeah, once you start adding things on, then unfortunately you get more confusion, and it's better to kind of keep things as simple as possible in the cannabis world. And so I do think that that should totally be separate legislation. And there are separate considerations about potency and where you can get it. And I mean, there's no mushroom dispensaries or anything like that. So they're similar, but they are too far apart. So I agree with you that keeping them separate is the smart way to go in order to move cannabis faster, and actually to make sure that you get the right regulation around magic mushrooms too.
Right. And I find it interesting. You call them magic mushrooms. Now I've been very open about this. Okay. And I'm not afraid to share again that I have never had the mushroom experience. Okay. Now I have lots of friends who have, and most of those friends have been urging me for years to try it. Okay. And I've resisted. I just, you know what? I'm happy with my cannabis. I'm happy with the buzz I get from that. Do I really need another plant medicine in my world? For what purpose? I don't know. I'll tell you when it'll happen. And I think you've already mentioned it. End of lifetime. I'll try it when I'm at that point.
That's interesting. The reason I do refer to it as magic mushrooms is because that's the roughly 200 mushrooms that will provide that psychotropic experience. Meanwhile, there are about 10,000 mushrooms and many more to be discovered. So that's why, and I don't know that everybody knows the word psilocybin either. So that's why I say magic mushrooms, because I think more people know what that is.
And I thought it was psilocybin.
You're actually right. There you go.
All right. I'm big about phonetics, right? Because it does. Don't ask me to spell the damn thing, but I think I can pronounce it the right way.
Well, you pronounce it and I'll spell it.
Yeah, there you go. That's a deal. That's a deal. Hey, let's talk a little bit about the educational experience.
Oh, yeah.
You're right in the middle. Are you right in the middle? Are you at the end of your semester? Where are you right now?
Oh, you know what? We should jump back to the other New Jersey legislation, though, which is probably the most important. And I'll try to keep this brief.
Okay, go ahead.
But we had the decrim part was something they're voting on. On the 17th, they'll vote on the adult use legislation. And the main takeaways from that are that it looks like there are going to be 37 cultivation licenses. So it's leaning towards big business. But on the other hand, it looks like there may not be a cap on micro licenses. And they see that as one way to have people who have been kind of barred from the industry. It's a lower point of entry. And so if you have the real estate, you have a little bit of financial backing, you can make a run at a micro license. So those are a couple of big takeaways. And then also a lot of the money that comes from the program is going to go to the neighborhoods, areas, cities that were affected by the war on drugs. So we're going to see immediate infusions of money into Patterson, Camden, Newark, Trenton, etc., which I think is going to be interesting to see what they'll do with that. I'm kind of hoping that there'll be kind of an incubation model to help people who don't know about business planning, financing, may not know about the subtleties of cannabis to learn. I mean, I would actually love to be a faculty member to help someone who's been affected by the war on drugs and help them to become a cannabis professional. I think that'd be pretty cool. So anyway, that's what's going on with the legislation that'll go through on the 17th.
I want to enlighten you about one thing. If you are privy to any of those internal conversations, did they create a regulatory board yet?
Most of the members have been announced, but they still have a few to go. The lead member of the board is actually from the NAACP, Diane Howe. So that'll be quite interesting to see how she'll have her impact. They did keep the assistant director of health, Jeff Brown is still in there as the assistant commissioner. And then they have one of the assemblymen voted or selected someone who's a social worker who is the wife of a freeholder. It is Jersey politics after all. So we still have 2 more members to be assigned, and then we'll have our 5-member cannabis commission who will hopefully get us going.
And the reason why where I'm going with this is my co-host on Friday's Green Rush show, where we look at the business of cannabis, is David Rabinovitz, and he and his wife Beth are involved in social equity training on business for the Cannabis Control Commission here in Massachusetts. Yeah. So I know I'll be happy to introduce you to David at some point, and if you point him in the right direction, he's pretty good at advocating for himself in these communities too. And now he's getting a much he's getting a really good track record, and people in the state know what he's doing. And it's all for the good. It's all for education, Rob, which is what we preach here on Professor Weed Wednesdays. Now tell me, how's the class been, and is it over yet?
We're winding down. So we had our last class on Monday.
Yep.
Both the introduction to medical cannabis class and the preparation for cannabis internship class, because I taught 2 classes this year. I had 61 students. It was quite a big load. As you can imagine, I'm grading papers and wrapping things up at the moment and getting students internships and jobs. So I'm quite busy, but I'm glad to say that in about a week to 10 days, I can actually take a breath and not have to worry about that, and relax for a day and then get back into it again.
There you go. And we're happy to talk with you about any interns, even remote interns these days. We have plenty of things for them to do to help us out too. And we're getting much better at this whole remote thing anyway.
Fantastic.
Which we have to, right? I mean, whether you're an educator or a host of a show, or we're all dealing with the whole remote component of our lives for sure. Rob, we're going to take a little bit of a break and roll some promotional videos. You and I will be able to talk during the break, just for the record.
Great.
And then we'll bring in our other 2 guests from the West Coast, from the University of California, Irvine, and their Center for the Study of Cannabis. Don't go away. Cannabis Chat continues after this.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Well, hello there. Here we are again, another live stream from the new studio of Pro Cannabis Media. This is Cannabis Chat, and I'm Jimmy Young. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Weed Talk News. I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media.
And I'm Kurt Dalton, the founder of Cannabis.net.
Every week, Kurt and I get together to review some of the biggest stories in the cannabis industry. He and I talk about them. We have a few comments, and then we get reports from Canada, New York, and Washington, D.C.
And this week's no different, Jimmy. We finally have Vermont moving toward recreational cannabis with retail opening in their state. We have an old state and a new state, Colorado and Illinois, both setting cannabis sales records in July, as well as multiple efforts to legalize the cannabis plant in America, including our friend Steve D'Angelo getting involved.
But first, let's go to Deborah Borchardt in New York to check on the financial weed scene. Deborah?
Thanks, Kurt. Thanks, Jimmy. Well, things seem to keep going the wrong way for Charlotte's Web.
Whoa, Jimmy Young, in the weeds on the water this week. We've got the CEO of Kushko, Nick Kovacevic, with me. This guy has built his little company in 6 years from $2 million in sales to $145 million in sales.
We can get this thing to be fully legal here in the next few years, I believe, but it's going to take far longer for the stigma to change.
I think you guys are the pro-cannabis story.
And I love Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi, I'm Jody Roberts with Eastern Security State, and I love Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi, I'm Laura Beener. I'm the president and co-founder of The Healing Rose, and I love Pro Cannabis Media. It's been such an integral part of our success here at The Healing Rose.
And you know what? The best media company out there is Pro Cannabis Media. Look out for them. They'll make you famous.
Hi, I'm George, and I love Pro Cannabis Media. I also love Western Mass Hydroponics, where we've got everything you need from seed to bloom to bud, and then to smoke it afterwards.
Take your Zoom call podcasts or webinars to a whole new level.
Nurse Mark and the
Hey.
Green Nurse Podcast. We are here.
That's right. PCM can animate your logo, add eye-catching full-screen graphics, and lower third identifying motion graphics. Look like the network. Act like the network.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
All right, welcome back to Cannabis Chat for a Wednesday afternoon. I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media, and every Wednesday when we do our live stream for 2 hours from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern, we call it Professor Weed Wednesdays because we like to talk to educators about cannabis. And Lord knows we all understand there's so much to learn about this plant, no matter what type of industry or your interest in it in any capacity. Rob Mejia continues to stay with us. And now we're joined by Bob Solomon. And he is he's been practicing law since 1972. So you're dating yourself a little bit there, Bob, but you are also a clinical professor at Yale Law School. And now you're co-director of UCal Irvine's Center for the Study of Cannabis. So Bob Solomon, thank you so much for joining us here.
My pleasure.
Tell us about the Center for the Study of Cannabis in UCal Irvine and how long it's been around, and what are some of the courses of study that you offer at that university?
Well, we've been around really since California legalized recreational cannabis a few years ago. The statute provides that there will be funds available, $12 million a year for 10 years, to University of California schools, California public schools, to study cannabis. So virtually every school, of course, immediately formed something. And we were the only, UC Irvine was the only campus that formed a joint medical legal partnership. So as it turns out, Daniele is a researcher for about 30 years on cannabis issues, so it was great. And my own research goes back, you noted I was in school, graduated law school in 72, which means I graduated college in 69, and my own research in cannabis is even longer than Daniele's, but not quite as rigorous. I like to note that I was introduced to cannabis in the living room of a guy named Mike the Russian in New Brunswick, New Jersey. And his research included putting a towel under the door so the fumes would not get out. So I have researched for a while. We formed the center and we do a variety of things. It's really the two of us and a few volunteers. We have other faculty members who are doing different work. We're concerned about a lot of issues. We are largely concerned about the racism and false image that has been portrayed about cannabis as a medicine, and how that has all not only impacted communities adversely, but also effectively prevented research. So we have spent a fair amount of effort in trying to publicize all of this, expand the opportunities for research, and Daniele, of course, is a researcher at the same time.
And we hope that Daniele Piomelli will join us at some point.
We emailed it half an hour ago, so I don't know what's going on, but what can I say?
We actually have a staffer behind the scenes who's probably reaching out now and whatever contact info she might have, and to try and walk them through. You know, the whole Zoom world, Bob, is completely different than we've ever had to deal with before. And some people still are challenged by it and some are not. I just sat on a media panel with Rob Mejia, who's also here with us. And we too even had some challenges, didn't we, Rob?
Beginning, yes, we had a few technical difficulties, but then we figured it out. We soldiered on.
That's right. And go ahead, Rob.
Because I teach clinical courses, I have 25 scheduled Zoomed meetings every week. Sometimes if I have 10 minutes in between, I go out on my porch and close my eyes. There's my friend, Daniele Pimelli.
Hello, guys. Sorry for being late. Can you hear me, first of all?
Yes, first of all, I can hear you. And Daniele Pimelli. Did I say your name right? I want Daniele Pimelli.
That's fine. That's perfect. Thank you.
Now, I understand that you've spent a little time in Italy, I guess, right?
I did spend about 25 years of my life there before, converting and becoming an American now. I'm not sure exactly why I did that, but it's okay.
We can get into that at another time. But your background is mostly in research, biological chemistry, anatomy, and neurobiology. I mean, this is one of the things that I love about getting in the cannabis world and doing some interviews with people, because all of you are so much smarter than I am. I was a sportscaster for 30 years, okay? So I interviewed a lot of athletes, let's just say. That being said, how many times can you ask, how do you feel and what's wrong with your shoulder? So point being, now that I'm interviewing experts, botanists, PhDs, doctors of science, and it's amazing to me. So I appreciate both of you taking the time to come in. And I'm also joined by Rob Mejia, who is also a professor at Stockton University in New Jersey. So that kind of sets the stage for our discussions here. And Daniele, let me ask you immediately, right back at you. There was some talk in Italy, okay, about CBD. There was some debate in the government there. At some point, they wanted to call it a narcotic. Can you enlighten me a little bit about that and why that happened? And now that the European Union has accepted it, what's going on in Europe as far as research of cannabis and use of it?
Well, that is a complicated question because there are multiple states of the union, and I am hardly familiar with almost anything that goes on over there. But so each individual nation, each individual country has got their own legislation, right? And for example, France is extremely restrictive, whereas Italy has a little bit more of medicinal cannabis actually is legal. Medicinal cannabis is legal there. It is distributed through pharmacies. The pharmacist is the point of contact with the public. The doctor will have to write a prescription, and the pharmacist fills it, and it's covered by the national health care. So it is at zero cost to the taxpayer. It is limited in its use to conditions that are medically established, but unfortunately there are so few of them that I think there is a lot of leeway in that arena. I was just on a video conference with a friend of mine and medical doctor there who told me that he prescribes it to patients, elderly people with Alzheimer's disease who are very agitated. And in his hands, and I know this from other sources, is actually quite effective and is a lot less toxic than other drugs that are currently used, like creatinine, for example. Antipsychotic drugs are used for that purpose. Often the last stages of Alzheimer's disease are accompanied by a lot of florid delusions, and they makes it very hard mostly on the caretakers, but apparently cannabis helps there. So that's for Italy. France, as I said, is much more restrictive. England has pretty much the same situation as Italy does. But if you go over each individual country, I will have to spend another hour on this. And honestly, I'm not an expert in this area. Legislation is actually Professor Solomon's, my good friend Bob's specialty, right?
I want to throw in a couple quick things since we went the international route. One strange thing about Italy is they actually had the military growing their cannabis. They actually might still be. I know that was the case as of about at least even a year ago, but they have the military involved. I think that's very interesting. And then there's 2 European countries where insurance covers cannabis, actually kind of 3. So Germany is one, Czech Republic is too, although Czech Republic only used 35 pounds of marijuana last year, so it's such a small market. We don't really talk about it. Israel pretty much is covered that way. They have a cap on the expenses. That's 3 of them. And going to Latin America, Colombia announced that they're going to allow insurance to cover their patients. And the big thing with that is Colombia has 94% of their population has insurance. That's going to be a big market. So anyway, that's my little international trivia, and I'll get back to the smarter professors now.
Well, Bob, I know you're a child of the 60s too, which I think is great. Can you believe, by the way, it's 2020, you're in California, completely different planet. We're talking about cannabis as a legal entity. We've got 15 states now that have voted in an adult use program. I mean, do you pinch yourself sometimes and say, is this really happening?
It is hard to believe, but what is also hard to believe is, to me, is the product and the potency of the product. So I will confess, I shouldn't say this, but back in the day, we would smoke a little bit and take a ride to get something to eat. And the first time I smoked legal cannabis in California, I had 3 hits, and I said to my wife, "Holy shit! There's no way I could drive a car." I mean, I'm like really stoned bonkers here. This is not what I was used to. So it's interesting, and it's a problem. I mean, it is a problem.
Right. Well, it's a problem because you have to learn how to self-medicate. And Daniele, I'm going to guess, as a scientist, someone who understands the cannabinoids and the endocannabinoid system and the role that metabolism plays in everybody, it's challenging when you talk to people about saying, it's going to have a different effect on you and you and you and you, because we're all different. Now they're growing the as Bob has explained, high percentage THC. And as someone who handles chronic pain, I'm always looking for that ratio of CBD and THC so I can get a little high, but more importantly, get rid of the inflammation. When you research and you look at this plant, we're still scratching the surface, aren't we, on what we know about it?
Yeah, it is interesting because we have really a very large amount of data on cannabis. Very, very large. We have tens of thousands of papers published on THC, on the cannabinoids. And in the last 10 years, there has been really a flurry of work done. The problem is that some crucial questions still are not answered. And one of the main reasons is legislation, because we can do a lot of work, but sometimes some of the most important work, it's very, very hard to do, or almost impossible to do, because of the legislative landscape. The reason, the limiter put to research, but also the difficulty in finding the appropriate funding to support a certain type of studies. So we do know a huge amount. Some key questions are still unanswered. And to your point, my recommendation is always, if you use cannabis for medicinal purposes, or even for recreational purposes, consider that, as Bob said, this is a different cannabis from it used to be, and consider that is something you need to respect because it has a lot of activity. So start low and educate yourself and stop when you feel that you got to the point that you want to. And this, unfortunately, is not completely satisfactory. So some of us, including myself, we would like to be able to say, here is a recipe, follow it. But I don't think that we are there. And maybe we will never be there, at least in the next 10, 15 years. Where I would like to be 5 years from now is to be able to say, well, look, if you have certain forms of chronic pain, you should take this particular cannabis preparation, and it should be at this dose range. So start from here, and and when you get to a certain point and you still don't see any effect, stop, because cannabis is not working for you.
Right. It's going to the plant is going to interact with your internal endocannabinoid system. That much we all know, but the effect it has, and you're right, it's start low and go slow. That's been the mantra. However, as you guys know, and maybe I'll go back to Daniele for a second here. When you ingest an edible versus an inhalation of the plant versus drinking a infused beverage, there are 3 different ways that the body reacts and different organs that is being put into your system. There are different ways that the body reacts to those different titration methods, right?
Yeah, so for our viewers who are not pharmacologists, I'll say, first of all, inhalation, either vaping or smoking, occurs essentially in the lungs. So the absorption occurs in the lungs. The smoke or the vapor arrives in our lungs. The lungs are full of blood vessels.
Yep.
And from the lung parenchyma, so the tissue of the lung, it goes into the blood and then straight up into the brain. So it's a very, very fast route. That's why usually people prefer either smoking or vaping. People who are, for example, who have chronic pain usually do prefer that because they can titrate. They can stop when they feel the response and they stop right away. So everything that is ingested, it goes through a different path, right? It goes into the stomach, it goes into the intestine. In the intestine, that's where most of these fatty compounds like THC are absorbed. And then they still go into the circulation, but they have to pass through one crucial obstacle before we get to the brain, and that's our liver.
Right.
The liver filters out stuff, right? So, and when the famous THC, the most psychoactive of the components of cannabis, gets to the liver, it is metabolized, which means that it's converted to something else. So that liver metabolism typically has the function of removing toxins. But in the case of THC, it doesn't quite work like that, because before you get to something that is completely inactive, you go to something that is actually a little bit more active. So THC is converted to something that is more active than THC itself before being actually destroyed. So in the first pass through the liver, the first thing that happens is that you get this pretty active molecule. It has a name, 11-hydroxy delta-9 THC. And this guy gets to the brain and it does a lot of stuff like THC, but it's a little bit more, it's got more punch than THC does. So now is an interesting thing. Women metabolize THC more than men do.
Huh.
Not just women, actually every female animal that I know of so far that we have studied has the same property. And that may explain why women are tendentially more, and that has been observed in many studies, more sensitive to the effects of cannabis. They tend to react actually more negatively to the drug than men do. That's sort of a little bit of a parenthesis, but to answer your question, yes, the 2 main routes of administration, which would be on one hand, smoking and vaping, on the other, drinking and eating, have deep differences that derive mostly from this metabolic step conducted by the liver. Now, there is, if I may, just one additional thing, there is also an issue of time, right? Because when you absorb through the lungs, it gets very quickly into your brain, and no metabolism. When you absorb through the intestine, it takes longer. So, the time to reach the maximum peak is shifted to the right. So it takes longer to get there. So sometimes you wonder, oh, okay, I had a brownie, nothing happened to me. I better have another brownie, right? Probably not a good idea. Probably not a good idea. But that's a reason why it's problematic. I think edibles tend to be a lot sorts of more trouble than they are worth it.
That's interesting you say that, because I agree 100%. It's a completely different reaction to your body. A head high versus a body high, if you will, or a head intoxication with a body intoxication. So, and you have to experiment with yourself to see what makes sense and what doesn't. But Bob, before I want to get back to you, because I do want to talk about the center that you both are involved with, the study for cannabis at UCal Irvine. And one of the things you mentioned right away was one of the things you guys do talk about is how race plays a role. Now, we just learned, by the way, that gender plays a role. Now we recognize just through statistics of arrest records and what have you, that it truly isn't a drug issue, it's a race issue, and it always has been. And law enforcement have used it for years to fill up the jails with too many people of color. So you have the stigma, you have the race issue. From your perspective as a lawyer and with a law background, you must be extremely upset when you look at the statistics and you see that there's been 511,000 arrests for cannabis possession versus 480,000 arrests for violent crimes. That's just a crazy stat. And I'm guessing it's one of the things that you have to talk about with your students too, right?
Yeah, you know, I think it's important that people know not just that result. There certainly is what in law we would call a disparate effect on people of color. And as you were alluding to, how police have used this over the years, but also how politicians have used it. We now have pretty good evidence that the Controlled Substances Act in 1970 was pushed by Nixon and the administration in large part to discredit the anti-war movement and the Black Power movement. But the people in the anti-war movement, of which I was one, didn't go to jail. Yeah, so we can go to jail. I hope you didn't go to jail. I did spend one night in jail, but it was not too bad. I was in a jail cell with Benjamin Spock, if you can believe it. That was interesting. So we have that situation, but clearly it's affected largely young African American men, and some of the drugs were planted, some were not. But it goes back way before that. The Hearst newspapers campaign throughout the 20s and 30s. Reefer Madness was meant to be an educational film and showing the dangers of the drug. The name marijuana, and I thank Daniele for cluing me into this, is itself racist as a way of tying the drug to Mexican farm workers and immigrants. And the whole notion, the whole campaign about the Marijuana Act of 1937 was that it will create violence in men and sexual promiscuity in women. And that great nightmare, the greatest nightmare of all in America, a white woman and a black man together sexually. I mean, that's the nightmare that was portrayed. And of course, that's the same exact nightmare as the founding of the Ku Klux Klan. So there really is a tremendous similarity in all of this. And yeah, I mean, this is a big part of what I try to teach students, not just the statistics, because they know the statistics already. But that the history is a scheme to put young black men in jail.
One quick point I'd like to add is I teach at Stockton University, and we actually have a minor in cannabis studies program there. And so this year I was teaching the Introduction to Medical Marijuana class and the Preparation for Cannabis internship class. And towards the end of the semester, I went to my advisor and I said, we need to change the name of our class. It should be called Introduction to Medical Cannabis, for two reasons. One is we do talk about hemp, and we talk about hemp's role with CBD, and there are some medicinal properties there. So it's not as accurate. So we need to include that, and it's also a racist word. I'm actually second generation Mexican American, so it kind of hit home for me in particular. And so voila, in 2 days it was changed. So next semester I will be teaching the Introduction to Medical Cannabis class.
Congratulations!
Right.
Congratulations!
Oh, that's great. I was very happy a couple of weeks ago when one of my students was talking, not in a cannabis course, in another course, and said, well, as far as marijuana, I mean cannabis. I said, good, we're getting there. We're getting there, one person at a time.
And well, I can actually relate a story I told earlier about a retired pediatrician in Massachusetts named Dr. Eric Ruby. And he is involved with the Massachusetts Medical Society, and he was on a call, he said, on Saturday for 9.5 hours with like 200 members of that. And he has gotten the medical society to get rid of the M word and replace it with cannabis in all of their policy talk. And he was very excited about that. And, we all should be excited about that, because it's another sign that perhaps we are breaking down some of the stigma. And, in California, I mean, you guys know it's been around since the mid 90s. I'm pretty sure it was 96, I think, when medical was first introduced in California. And it's been far more accepted in California. And yet there's so many different regulations now. I'm not quite sure the governance is where it should be either in California, but then again, it's California. So I understand that.
We can assure you the governance is not where it needs to be.
Yeah.
You can take that as an absolute given fact.
Yeah. And especially on the social equity side of things too, they're having quite a bit of issues in Los Angeles, specifically, I guess, with the opportunities that they're trying. See, I think the intent is we want to try and help those that were the most impacted on the war on drugs, but nobody knows how best to do it without perhaps creating a fund that is available to that community to get into this business. Is that what
or partnerships? I'll be out. I do know how to do it. We all know how to do it. But you're absolutely right. It involves capital. Without capital, the small business can't succeed in this world. And whether it's through partnerships or grants and loans, either way will work. But we have not yet shown the political will to do that.
The other thing, and all of us being educators here, that we need is education. So if they have funding and partnerships, that's step one, but then they also need training on how the plant grows, how to work in a dispensary, all those practical things that they may have missed out on. So I do think that if you have like an incubator, you have some funding and you have mentors or people who will help out, that's at least a good start. I would love to see that kind of program be rolled out.
Right. And of course, the MORE Act that was symbolically passed last Friday does have a component in it for a federal tax that would create that fund that would allow people to get involved in the business. Just closing thoughts, guys, about what you'd like to see happen at your center for the study of cannabis at the University of California, Irvine, perhaps over the next few years as we get more and more acceptance and you get more and more undergrads and people who are interested in making this a career and a business. Bob, what would you like to see happen as far as perhaps a different type of class, or what are some of the areas of study you'd like to see the university expand on?
Well, I'm a clinical professor of law, which means that I have students working on behalf of real clients. I did that at Yale, and that's why I came here to start our community and economic development clinic. Students work on really complex real estate deals and other deals. I would like to see us have a cannabis clinic where we are representing those exact equity applicants that you're talking about, people who have suffered over past years, either individually, through family members, or through their communities, and work towards providing them serious and necessary legal services pro bono. We just closed a $10 million deal to allow residents to buy the mobile home park they live in, which will allow them to have an affordable rent in perpetuity, as opposed to having real estate developers take it over. We put in, $100,000, $200,000 worth of free legal services, and that's what we would like to do for in the cannabis world. And we can do that. My school is supportive. We have to find either my clone or someone else who will join me in this, but it'll happen. It'll come.
And Daniela, you're not working on a human cloning, are you?
No, please don't. Let's not go there. The idea of having another me running around gives me the creeps. So no. But from a scientific perspective, what we're looking at is two major issues. One is research, and the other is education, as was said before. Educationally, I think there is a lot of work to be done. I think we need to target, first of all, the physicians. We need to target the starting physicians, so medical students. They need to learn about cannabis, something that was not in the curricula. It's still pretty much not in any curriculum across the country. So we doing our little here at UCI. We have a medical school class that teaches, which I teach, which goes over cannabis, the benefits and the risks. And I think that way the physician is primed to this whole issue. But I think, aside from them, we need to target nurses, we need to target, educators. So it's a long road ahead. Research-wise, I think you alluded it before. You said that what kind of questions we have still open. We have many questions open, but I think we need to answer one each of them by itself. So the first one, the low hanging fruit is the effect of medicinal cannabis on pain. We have already substantial evidence that it's effective in adults, and it is my hope that we as a center can contribute to understanding the real effectiveness and efficacy of cannabis preparations in various forms of chronic pain, neuropathic pain, inflammatory pain. This is an attainable goal that can be attained in the next 4 or 5 years if we work on this, if we are allowed to work on this. So my last plug is, this is a time for all of us who have this type of views on cannabis. We will take cannabis seriously, to press our lawmakers in DC to take the issue seriously and bring forward a bipartisan bill that has a chance of passing the Senate and to be signed by President Biden. It is a very, very important thing. President Biden himself does not necessarily have the latest ideas on cannabis. He's a very conservative viewpoint on cannabis, but I think it's just because he has not been educated by the science on the matter. So it is my hope that ears will perk up, and they, in DC, they will start asking questions, and we and many others are all very, very willing to go and explain and talk, so that we remove the one major obstacle to research, which is really the CSA and the scheduling of cannabis as a Schedule I drug.
Well, you know that the MORE Act was symbolic for sure, and I also know that the U.S. House is going to take up a research bill as well over the next few days, even before they adjourn for the year. So at least they are symbolically listening to people like yourselves and all of us here to make some changes. I think they recognize that changes have to be made, and now it's just a question of who gets what where and who's going to lead the way and what the final is. And it's good. What I always ask, and Bob, you'll appreciate this, when people ask, what's a good place to invest in the cannabis industry? And I say, invest in a good law firm. Because you're gonna not only you're gonna create the laws, but then you're gonna have people challenging the laws, and it's just gonna go on forever and ever as we interpret this whole new world that we're in. Guys, I so appreciate you taking the time out and joining us from the left coast. We wish you the best of luck at the University of Cal Irvine and the Center for the Study of Cannabis. Lord knows you've got an open forum and an opportunity to come here, perhaps recruit somebody from the East Coast as well. So again, I thank you both for joining us. Rob, always a pleasure. Love sitting on the media panel with you today. And you're always welcome on this show as well. So for everybody here at Pro Cannabis Media, remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
As we speak, and we're so happy to have reconnected with Dr. Mary Clifton. Hello, Dr. Mary. How are you today?
Hi, just great. Great to connect with you again. How are you, Jimmy?
I'm doing fine, and I'm joined by Andrew Elk, who is
Hi there, Mary.
Hi.
He is with a medicinal dispensary in the greater Boston area, Revolutionary Clinics. It's where I go for my medicine, and I've been working with them for at least since 2018 when I first started this whole thing. And I'm big fans of their operation and how they handle things. And it's really interesting. Andrew actually mentioned something, and I'm going to digress a little bit here, Mary, just for a second, that there's actually rankings of bud tenders. Did I hear that right? There's actually
I didn't know that.
Right?
There is. I didn't know that.
Andrew, is that
Yep.
true?
Yes, there are many organizations, the most famous, like bud tenders, cannabis plants themselves, genetics, like there's many professional ranking systems in cannabis. The most famous ranking system is probably known as the Cannabis Cup, right? That's an award show.
Oh, well,
that
of
happens
course.
in California, Colorado, has been going on since the 90s.
Right.
Relatively recently, yes, this was a Sensi magazine, which I believe is a national cannabis publication, put out their top 25 national bud tenders. And we had 2 team members make the top 25. Our Canna Mom, who's been on the back of several magazine covers, she leads our virtual consultations team. And then the Canna Kid, who is very sort of baby-faced but incredibly intelligent Joe Casper, who is just a phenomenal like patient advocate bud tender. We're so proud to have both of them on our team.
Boy, I have somebody I could nominate. I mean, I worked with a bud tender back in Michigan, you know, but I'd love to connect with some of these people and, you know, bring some of their knowledge into my training program, you know, and make sure that we have, because I'm sure they have tools and information that I haven't even thought of sharing yet, you know. I mean, they are just such a wealth of knowledge. Like they say about doctors, that when you get a doctor first out of medical school, they're really smart, but they just haven't seen a lot of patients. And then they get their feet under them. And, you know, by the time a doctor hits their stride in their 30s, probably up until sort of my age, that they do okay. But when you get into your 50s, you know, if you're not reading and if you're not keeping up on your continuing med, you're going to fall behind a little bit. But, you know, a doctor in that 35 to 50 range is a good spot where they can say, I've seen, or my experience has been, and like it matters. You know, it doesn't matter when they're saying that when they're 25, and they might be just a little too old when they get too old. But you know, but that's what I love about the bud tenders is they have that experience. They're standing in front of people every day, and they can say, you know, my experience has been, and then that's super powerful.
Now, let's I'm going to read the quick bio of Dr. Mary Clifton, if you don't mind. I think anybody who's watched this show regularly recognizes who we have on, and I appreciate that. But she's a board-certified licensed internal medicine doctor, a recognized expert in CBD, cannabis, and the founder of CBD and cannabisinfo.com, which is where you can find that. She gives a professional certification in the cannabinoid protocol. And you've also had time to write a book. The Grass is Greener, Medical Marijuana, THC, and CBD Oil. And then I love this, Reversing Chronic Pain, Inflammation, and Disease, and Get Wasted, as well as 5 other companion cookbooks.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you do in your spare time, Mary? Come on.
Well, you know what? I actually have a book that is so gorgeous that I'm really proud of. That's come, not that I don't love my other work, but this is such a nice book coming out. It's going to be available at Barnes and Noble April 20th. Is the launch date. It's the Cannabis Handbook. And we're going to put together, I'm hoping for a really beautiful documentary to support the book, you know, at the same time. So that's my spring project. That's my winter and spring project. While the snow is swirling, it'll give me a good excuse to not go outside.
There you go. And I'll tell you, I'm going to, it's not a competitor because as you know, we're all about educating the public, right? And we all know that there's a ton of public and a ton of education, right? There are other people out there who have books. I want to give equal time if that's okay. Ruth Fisher, do you know Ruth Fisher?
Yeah, I think I've seen this book.
Yeah, this is really, again, it's a primer, okay? And ushering in the golden age of marijuana. And we interviewed her and she sent me this book. So I'm obviously looking forward to reading your book too. Don't kid yourself. And more importantly, we'll be happy to air that documentary too. But they really, it's an incredible tool. There's a chart now in my office about the ratio between CBD and THC and the different diagnoses and what they recommend, or at least have heard anecdotally about the type of ratio between CBD and THC. And of course, this lends itself to a conversation about that entourage effect, because the whole plant medicine, CBD versus THC, just two of the most well-known cannabinoids in this plant. There are so many that they're still discovering every day now that research is ongoing. So I look forward to seeing your spin on this. And, you know, the word fascinating describes what's going on with this green wave. We talked about at the top of the hour, the World Health Organization and the UN looking to perhaps reschedule, if not deschedule, cannabis internationally. We heard about the MORE Act moving into the House of Representatives, perhaps to get a whole floor vote on Friday.
Yeah.
There's a lot of moving parts going on here. How do you?
And you heard about the UN this morning. Isn't that so neat? Isn't that so neat?
Look, I think it's amazing. And I'm going to say this internationally, and, you know, I have a background in sports, so I always throw this out there. You know that the FIFA World Cup in 2018, okay, this is the biggest sporting event in the world every 4 years. It's an international soccer tournament. And they were the first major sports event to not test for CBD as a banned substance. And that was 2 years ago on an international, and here we are 2 years later, finally seeing another international effort to perhaps give it some respect as a medicinal product. So I guess my question to you, Mary, is as you look back at the last half dozen years, I'm amazed at how quickly we have moved the needle.
Yeah. Oh, I really think when it came into my perception was when the cannabis workers were considered essential workers. It was clear that they're recognizing cannabis as medicine and as valuable medicine that people can't do without. That was a very powerful moment for me, that the dispensaries were able to stay open as essential. And I think you're right. I keep watching all of these developments and being amazed one after another at how we've gone from something that is under a strict prohibition, and really in the space of a couple of decades, I think we're moving to federal legalization. I was just at the MJ BizCon in Las Vegas. You know, of course, it's all so unfortunately and so depressingly online because there's just no place in the world that's as much fun as Vegas, in my opinion. But so I sure wish I was there. But online will have to do. But the speaker said, you know, that what was her point? That 70% of adults have access to legal cannabis, and 30% of adults have full access, and 70% have access to medical. You know, so we're really at a point where the majority of people, if you need it, you can access it. That's wonderful. And I think even if you say you're using it recreationally, I think there's a medicinal component to the recreational use, because we all have social anxiety when you're getting into a, social environment with your friends, and you're stressed and anxious and worried that you're not going to, that you didn't wear the right clothes, or that, you're not as comfortable at this particular location, or you're not as successful as that friend. And all of those feelings really pile on when you're in social environments, and using cannabis in those circumstances really helps to just let you relax and enjoy the experience, and that's where you see all of the great healing hormones and the neurotransmitters that deliver in, and that people benefit from with social experiences.
Andrew and I, we talked a little bit about MJ BizCon before you got into the Zoom room with us. And we mentioned the fact about Essential. And Chris Walsh, who's the CEO of MJ Biz Daily and gave the initial remarks at MJ BizCon today online, talked about that and how that was such a significant development in the legitimacy of the movement. And even John McKay, who was the CEO of Whole Foods, Chris asked him a great question right off the bat. And he said, we've been after you to be a speaker at our convention for a number of years. You always said no. Why did you say yes to this year? And his answer was along those same lines. He says, well, even 4 years ago, I talked to my PR group and got consulting from them. And they said, the downside to appearing at a cannabis convention probably outweighs the positive, and that was 4 years ago. And here we are reversing it, and now he's speaking there. So we have, even in that 4-year period, a major company like Whole Foods recognizes that perhaps, you know what, it might be time to get on this bandwagon, because even the Gallup poll says 68% of Americans want to see this thing legalized.
Well, and that's really, I mean, his point, I enjoyed that interview so much, where he talked about how, they wanted to get into it, and there's certainly a market share to get into it, and there's value, but then there's also the issue that, if it gets shut down, you don't want it, you don't want federal people raiding all the foods. So he really let everybody else take that risk ahead of him. And then once it had permeated pretty well, he makes a good point that as an industry, we have to work really hard to provide products that have value, and to be very clear in our messaging about their level of function, what people can expect, so that people really feel safe, and that they have a clear understanding of what kind of result they're going to get from using the products. We don't want to sell this, even though, I mean, the problem is, though, fundamentally, is that in so many situations of ill health, you're dealing with inflammation. And if you control inflammation, you control all kinds of things, right? You control arthritis syndromes and painful muscle syndromes and muscle spasm and headache and low back pain. There's and all kinds of abdominal symptoms. So really, it's, if you're treating like in this very base way, it makes sense that an aspirin works in a whole bunch of situations,
Right.
And the same thing with CBD, but that sales pitch sounds really snake oily to a lot of people, that it can work in so many different ways.
Yeah, but you even mentioned it, and Andrew, I'm going to bring you into this because you're in the trenches. You're at a medical dispensary just outside of Boston, 3 locations, and the recreational versus the medicinal use, or even the perception. How and all, I get it. Rev clinics, all 3 medicinal dispensaries.
Happy to talk about that. Yeah.
Right. But as Mary talked about, even those that are going to recreational stores, they don't realize, I don't want to say the ease, but the process of getting your medical card has become easier for the public. Yes?
So, yeah, I'll start by talking about ease of access. So I'm very happy to see that now I think COVID has motivated so much technology change and growth in such a short period of time. I remember pre-COVID, my sister, who's going to college in California, she was basically bugging me to, like, when she would come back home, to like get her illicit cannabis. And I said, you're going to school in California. It is so easy to get legal, easy, excellent cannabis. So she had a med card to her name in about 45 minutes. She virtualed, she FaceTimed. This is pre-COVID with a doctor. The doctor's office was set up to do that. It wasn't until COVID in Massachusetts that we now have that same technology, right? There was nothing holding us back from that, rather than a lack of desire to innovate. But the difference between recreational and medicinal, I'm very proud and happy that we've been able to stay open throughout the entire time. We've had an extraordinarily small, I believe it's 4 total cases of COVID, each of them in our entire company. Each of them has led to exactly 0 cases of intercompany spread. So we identified that employee, they tested positive outside of the work environment. We locked down the facility, we sanitized, we put really strong procedures in place. But getting to the difference between recreational and medical was one of the very first lessons I learned when I entered the industry. The company I was working for did a really excellent talk. They brought in a cannabis doctor who specialized. And what he said is that you basically have 2 customer types. You have customers who want to feel normal. We might call these the normal patient customers. They are using cannabis to achieve a very specific result. Cannabis is allowing them, whether it's CBD that's allowing them to do more with their daily routine. They can be slightly more active over time with no psychoactive, with no stony effects, essentially. So there's that group of customers who is seeking a product to solve a problem, right? They are looking to achieve a very specific, like, bodily or mental result. Then there's another group of customers who sort of wants the hottest thing, the newest thing, the highest testing thing, the most exciting thing. We might call those the traditional adult use or recreational customers. They're the customer who is excited when there are new products on the menu. These are the customers who are like, I've tried that before. I don't want the same thing I had last time, versus the medical customer who generally, once they find a product that works for them, what their main concern is like, is it consistently available? And that's what will solidify a relationship between a patient and a provider, like a dispensary like ours, is can we provide them consistently a product that's giving them the result they want? To me, that's the primary distinction between, I mean, I am also someone who started out as an adult use user. And as Mary said, I'm someone who benefits from reduced social anxiety, right? I use cannabis to fall asleep. I use cannabis in place of many of the medications that I used for a decade to manage attention deficit disorder. So there are all kinds of ways that we can introduce cannabis into productive, high-functioning lives that do not translate to like the stereotype, I think, that we were all raised with on television of like the super stoner, right? Like there are a lot of very high functioning, intelligent people and every kind of person in between who can benefit from cannabis, medical or otherwise.
You know, I really think that in a lot of situations, these blue zones that you hear about where people live longer lives and they live highly purposeful lives well into their advanced age, and everybody's always trying to uncover the secret of the octogenarian, like that is still operating in the operating room, or the octogenarian who's still carrying the water for the family. Like what makes that person in, you know, in a higher number in certain populations, where in other populations like ours, a lot of 80-year-old people are just sitting in a chair, you know, without any value and without having a lot of fun, you know. And I think in a lot of cases, you're really underestimating the amount of use of products that reduce social anxiety and help to ease the situation and make people feel better, that makes life so much more valuable for them and keeps them in a community. You know, a lot of people tend to isolate and start to take things personally and start to not, you know, interface with other people as effectively, especially as they get older. But, you know, you look at the Italians, these blue zone Italians that live forever, and they drink a bunch of red wine, and everybody says, oh, it's the resveratrol in the wine, or it's the Mediterranean diet. But what I think it actually is the alcohol in the wine. and they feel fantastic. They hang out with each other. They have conversations. Nobody's taken anything personally. And, you know, and I think if we looked into these pockets in China, we'd be able to identify that there's some mood altering product, and it might be cannabis in that case, where people are able to just relax and chill with each other.
Relax and chill. Now that's nice to hear, you know, especially during these difficult times. This has been the most challenging time, certainly of my lifetime. I mean, I do remember the 60s. I do remember the protest era. I do remember 3 of the greatest leaders of my lifetime getting shot. So there's certainly been some tumult in the 60s and 70s during that protest era, during the Vietnam War. But this particular time period, it's affecting everybody, and it goes across political lines. It goes across socioeconomic lines. It goes across racial lines, although we've seen more cases of those people who are people of color have had more problems with COVID, and it reflects, and it goes to cannabis again. Anytime that there's something going on, it does seem to be exacerbated by our socioeconomic divisions. And even John Mackey talked about this a little bit in his speech today, his talk today at MJ BizCon, that the 1%ers, you know what I'm talking about, right? They're the ones that are getting all the benefits, and they seem to live in that ivory tower, if you will, and the rest of the world has to handle all these challenges.
You know, it's so hard to know, Jimmy, which direction to be sad about first. I mean, our government is in such disarray, and then I find myself dreaming about the pandemic a lot. And last night, that was a good share of the evening, and working on novel ways to stimulate the immune system. I was like, it was a pleasant evening because I spent the whole of it in a laboratory, and that was fun. I do like to spend time in a laboratory.
Are you a science geek or what? I mean, that's great. You have a home lab. You have a home lab,
Yeah,
right?
I suppose if somebody, if somebody else dreamed that, they'd wake up having, I'm hearing that the dentists are saying that people are fracturing their teeth. They're finding teeth fractures a lot because people are grinding so hard at night. But, but it is really changing the structure and nature of my sleep. And I've been trying to crack that egg, for myself and for my patients during this whole pandemic, really trying to ease on sleep and sleep efficacy. And I wondered, what your experience has been at your, because like I said, you're getting a whole bunch of people in front of you at your dispensary. I've been seeing a lot of people upping their CBN, and I know that the research on the CBN is a little where the laboratory data suggested that it had more sedating potential, but then subsequent small studies didn't necessarily support, but some animal research supports. So, I mean, what's working? What's working for people?
So we are absolutely seeing an uptick both in purchasing, in spending, we're specifically seeing an increase in, we always see, whenever you see an increase, you see increases in flour, edibles, but we can't make CBN fast enough, frankly. So we have a unique cocktail, unique to Revolutionary Clinics. It is a 4 to 2 to 1 ratio, 4, I believe, THC, 2 CBN, 2 CBD, 1 CBN. But basically the plan there is that we anecdotally absolutely are hearing feedback that CBN is effective for sleep. So the cocktail that we've put together is really meant to CBD to reduce inflammation and to sort of THC for pain management, and then CBN for provoking drowsiness. So we've had tremendously positive feedback. We call that our Astaria, sort of like stars in the sky as you go to sleep. So our Astaria cocktail. But we call that our sleep cartridge. And we have an entire laboratory devoted to turning THC vaporizer oil into CBN vaporizer oil. At any given moment, we've got like 80 square feet devoted to, 20 some odd like hot plates that are just, because it's quite a process.
I was going to say, do you just put it out in the sun?
Oh, I wish it was that easy. But yeah, it is truly like a bunch of Lazy Susan hot plates that sort of stir and stir for about 2 weeks. Because we found out that if you make CBD pure, you actually will create like a little bulletproof brick. You can't vape it, you can't smoke it. You can make an indestructible barrier out of it, but it basically turns to plastic when you have pure CBN. So you need to, in order to maintain a liquid state, you need THC, or you need all other cannabinoids in there, basically. So we sort of stumbled upon this happy formula of THC, CBN, and CBD as this cocktail together, and we've had really positive feedback.
Well, now what if you have the pure? Oh, really? Your mom uses it? Good for you. Yeah. That's awesome that you've been able to work with her and help her. Let me ask you this: when you're using the CBN and it turns into a solid, if it's administered as a solid, as a pure CBN, does it disperse with the exposure to the hydrochloric acid? I've been hearing about hydrochloric acid exposure and the way that it might change THC and promote the production of THC from other cannabinoids, but I don't really have that research solidly.
So I'm not exactly familiar. I know that there are many cannabinoids and terpenes which increase the efficacy or absorption rate, basically that increase the your body's ability to absorb. I actually don't know if we've done studies with the solid. I think initially we were really, the product for the masses that we found seems to be this vape oil cartridge, just as a way to cheaply and mass produce as many of these things. Because frankly, we kept upping the price on CBN for a while and we kept selling out. So we were not able, because frankly, it's much cheaper to produce THC than it is to produce CBN. So for us, we were trying to make business sense of how to serve a medical customer base and have product that's readily available.
Wow.
So we landed.
I love the vape, because the vape is brilliant for serving a medical customer base, because here you are trying to fall asleep and you finally decide I'm going to do something, and you take an Ambien or a prescription therapy, and then you wait for 40 or 50 minutes or an hour. And at this point, if you're already coming up on where you only have 7 hours left to sleep and you can't fall asleep, then you're not you've already lost. But the
Right.
inhalation methods are such rapid onset, so you could put a product together like the one you described, and somebody could take one inhalation and literally wait 2 minutes, and then if they aren't totally feeling it at 5 or 6 minutes, one more inhalation, and voila. That's a brilliant way to do this.
To solve your question about edibles, of course, there are customers and medical users who don't want to do any form of inhalation. So I know that we are working toward an edible sublingual form factor, like a breath mint style, sort of an Altoid style.
Mhm.
We have a brand that we work with that is a mint maker, Mr. Moxie's, and so they have one of the #1 sublingual edible mints in the California, Colorado, and Oregon markets. And so right now we're making sativa indica hybrid, right? It's really rare to find truly full spectrum edibles, right? Edibles that actually convey the effects of the flower that they originate from. Most edibles are made with raw THC oil, which is why so many people their reaction to edibles is, oh, edibles make me drowsy. People tend to love edibles, or they say edibles make me drowsy. So that is a goal for us. We currently are making these lineage specific sativa indica hybrid varieties, an energizing edible, a relaxing edible, a 1-to-1 sort of centering edible. But CBN is the next major cannabinoid. It's definitely the fastest growing cannabinoid in our business, next to CBD.
Yeah, CBN.
I just hope we don't see CBN at a gas station like you see CBD. Okay.
No, that stuff terrifies me.
I'm with you on that. I will. And you mentioned the mints. I've had the mints. That's why I raised my hand. I've used the mints. I've liked the mints. Edibles.
I think I have those right here.
Yeah. And you can hold them up. Terrific. Edibles.
Very pretty
versus
packaging.
Inhalation.
Nice.
Okay? Edibles give you that whole body effect, if you will. Certainly great for pain. But there's that uncontrollable feeling sometimes, the titration and the dosage. And
my gosh!
Right, I'm still a little uncomfortable when I take an edible, and I might get a little too buzzed, and it happened on Thanksgiving Day, guys. Okay, I'll be perfectly honest with you, and I use straight CBD out of the bottle, like 2 droppers full, just to calm myself down, and I was amazed that it worked.
It's a perfect parachute. It just pops the THC off the receptors and then and helps to just promote relaxation instead of that excessive high. I'm so glad that worked for you, because everybody who has used an edible has a very bad story about using an edible. Everybody so you've got
their nightmarish edible experience. And Andrew, as someone who's in the trenches, how do you explain that to people? And I know the mantra is you start low and you go slow. And we know that there's a delayed onset, right? And by the way, that delayed onset, I have found, depending on your metabolism and who's using it or whatever, could take 20 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, 4 hours sometimes. There's no predicting. So I guess as a doctor, Mary, okay, how do you can certainly do the preaching, go low, and see how it reacts. You have to self-medicate and use yourself as a guinea pig. And that can be scary for a lot of people who don't have, let's say, as much experience as a 63-year-old guy like myself.
Yeah, they need to have a parachute in place. I think anytime, but I really like to start with an inhalation model and give people an easy to titrate product, and then or a sublingual, and I don't know. I'd really like your opinion on this too. I don't know if you go by Andy or Andrew.
And I love Andrew.
Mary,
do you?
Thank
you. And do you prefer Mary or Dr. Clifton? I'm very happy.
I don't know. I guess whatever. Dr. Mary is kind of my gang
Dr.
name.
Mary. I like Dr. Mary. Thank you, Dr. Mary. Yes, Andrew is perfect.
Andrew. I think I would go by Andrew too, or maybe Drew. Did you ever go by Drew?
It's funny. I went by my last name for a while. My last name is Elk, so sometimes people called me Moose. But Drew, my girlfriend sometimes calls me. Yes.
Yeah, I think that's probably what I would do if I was you, but it's such a great name, because Mary is just Mary. There's no other choice. but yeah, going back to the different methods, I really like to start people on something that they have 100% control over. But it's amazing how many times people will tell me, I want an edible. And then I tell them, I'd really like you to try, an inhalation first. We'll figure out what you need, and then we'll transition you to an edible 2 or 3 times a day. And then they basically say, I want an edible. People just don't see a danger to a gummy bear or a cookie. And it's hard for, I can't really be clear about, I just have to be clear about being very careful with your dosing when you're using an edible. But it's a hard sell to convert the person who really wants to use an edible into an inhalation, because they're just not going to do it.
Interesting. Right. I want to ask a question. First of all, Dr. Mary, can you hang out for a little while, because we really don't have anybody lined up next, and we'd love to continue this conversation. Are
sure.
you okay with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. I appreciate that. We are going to take a little break. We always do about a half hour in or so. So let's take a little break. We'll come back on the other side. And I do want to talk to you both about the vaping. And, we've had some discussions in the past about the dangers of vaping. We understand what happened with vitamin E acetate, and that was horrific. But I do want to talk about the benefits of vaping as opposed to smoking or not. So we'll have that after this. Don't go away.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.